Okay, hello everyone. I'm Nabila Jaffer from University of Michigan, and I have been presenting about Deep Blue data, I think, for the last 2 years, but this year we have a panel. We have Michigan, Fritz and myself, and then we have Indiana and Duke, and I'll let them introduce themselves before we move on. So, John? Or?
We just did when we go up.
Oh, okay, so we'll do the introductions later. Okay. Okay, so just to give you all an idea what are we gonna cover today, we'll do the introductions, and then we're gonna talk about curations and workflow, and then we'll be talking about like how each institution is doing that, and branding and relationship to other platforms, customizations, and data management and access. And then we're gonna have time for questions and answers. So. The first one is Michigan, and I already introduced myself, Nabila from University of Michigan. I work as a program manager there, and Fritz is the tech lead on this project. Deep Blue Data is a research data repository, and if you go on Deep Blue, which is the institutional repository, this is what you see. So it says Deep Blue is expanding. When you click on Deep Blue data, that is Hyrax space. But if you click on Deep Blue, this is D space. So that is something later we'll be talking about how we are trying to combine the two and migrate D space to Hyrax so that it's like one interface. So Deep Blue data is open data access, and I think it is like, we'll talk about the stats a little bit later. But technically speaking, we started off, the first beta launch was in February 2016. And at that time, it was on Sophia. It was not even Sophia 7 was not even launched. So it was Sophia 7 beta and beta launch for Deep Blue data. Then in September, it was Sophia 7. That was actually launched in production. In August of last year, we updated to Hyrax 1.0, and currently we are in the process of updating to 2.0. So soon you will see the latest one. This shows the data in terms of terabytes, right? So we started off with October 2017, and you can see the uptick. And it's like, it seems like it is going up and up and up. Okay, and this is the current one. We have like 7 collections, 132 works, file sets, collection size is about 211 gigabytes, and work size is about 8 terabyte. And so the public total is something that is publicly viewable by everyone, and the other total is the private, although we don't really encourage the private ones, but there are some in draft that are being mediated and they are not public. So that's the difference that it shows, that its total data size is 11 terabyte, but actually 8 terabyte is publicly viewable. And I think that's all for me.
Hi, I'm Will Sexton. I'm the head of software services at Duke University Libraries. I'm going to talk about our research data repository platform, which we built in Hyrax. The formal name of our platform is Duke Digital Repository Research Data. We just kind of call it Research Data Repository, or RDR for short. You can see the URL there. It is a platform and a set of curation services that we provide for researchers at Duke. We were previously supporting the service using a Fedora 3 Hydra stack, and we just made the decision to move to Hyrax in part as a way to teach ourselves and so that we could learn and explore Hyrax as a platform for potentially other uses as well. We have 43 deposits to date. Our project began late last year, and we rolled it out last week. And we did a poster, and that slide links to our poster, and our poster is also a Google slide. but you can see it if you link to it. This is the screenshot of the home page, and I just wanted to kind of highlight that there is a big button on the page that initiates the submission process for research data for researchers. And I wanted to highlight that because a lot of the work that we did on Hyrax was focused on a mediated deposit process, which my colleague Maura will talk a little bit more about. All of the submissions that we do are handled by the data curation team. And I think that's the end of my introduction. By the way, we originally saw this as a panel where we would all be sitting at a table with individual mics, but we're going to do this kind of musical chairs format here.
All right, thanks, Will. My name is John Dunn. I'm Assistant Dean for Library Technologies at Indiana University Bloomington. Unfortunately, our research data librarian and the developer who's actually doing work for us in this area couldn't make it to the conference, but I'll try to fill in for them as best I can. We're a little bit at a different place than either Michigan or Duke in that we don't yet have a Hyrax or Samvera-based research data repository. It's something we're working towards. So what we do have right now is we have support for research data within our existing DSpace-based institutional repository. And this is something that we rolled out, the data capability within our IR. We rolled out nearly 10 years ago, actually. I looked back. I think we first presented on this at Open Repositories 2009 in Atlanta. And the functionality more or less has not changed since then. But we do have, at this point, about 750 data items in our DSpace IR, about 850 gigabytes of research data that have been made available through the institutional repository, and this is just a screenshot of a data item within the IR. Ever since we first put DSpace in place for our institutional repository, we have described it as a stopgap. Our goal was always to get to Fedora. Everything would be on the same back end, Fedora. More recently, it's been everything will be Samvera. And we started to do some work along these lines toward research data a few years ago in the context of a specific project working with a number of natural history collections from around the campus and dealing with both images but also other kinds of data derived from those images and how we might store those in our repository environments and interoperate with some of the systems they use. And so we built a Sophia-based repository called Imago as kind of a proof of concept and trial and help inform where we go in the future with research data. And that experience and other experiences with Hyrax have confirmed that that is the direction we want to go in. And we're pursuing this as part of a broader collaboration within the university in which we're working with our colleagues on our Indianapolis campus in the library there, as well as with the Central IT organization, who actually host a lot of the infrastructure, including Fedora, Solar, storage, and other things, for us to develop a set of enterprise-level repository services that would be used across the institution, across all campuses of Indiana University. The data repository work that we're doing is initially focused on Bloomington as a test case, and then we'll see where it goes past then. But rather than go alone in trying to solve some of the same problems that you'll hear Duke and Michigan talk about, we have decided to collaborate with the University of Michigan in co-developing functionality that would be of benefit to both of us. And we're going to kick that off later this month, and we'll talk a little bit more of some of the shared feature interests in that. But that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay. So the first topic is curation and submission workflow. And the way we are doing is only University of Michigan users can deposit. So we have integrated cosign. You have to log in using your UMich credentials. If there is a possibility of friends account, they can also deposit their work. When we started back in 2017, all the works were open access. Anybody who deposits something, that would go live right away. So that is something that Research Data Services found out, that there was no mediation. It was something that people were like just putting in data, which was not complete, and it was just published. So for that reason, we put in the draft functionality, but now with Hyrax 2, we get the one-step mediated deposit, and that's something we'll be using soon after this Hyrax 2.0 goes into production. I think I did cover it all. So one more thing is with the one-step mediated deposit, the Research Data Services Group will review it and then publish it, and then either they can mint the DOI or the users can also mint the DOI.
Hi, I'm Maura Downey. I'm the Digital Repository Content Analyst with the Duke Digital Repository. And as Will mentioned, all of our research data deposits are going to take place in a mediated fashion, but not mediated in the way that Hyrax speak. One of our major customizations has been to remove all of the self-deposit capacity from Hyrax. We have a curation team of 4 staff members who are able to do some pre-publication evaluation of the data set before the ingest happens. So no direct uploading of materials by the depositors. Instead, we created a submission web form that's directly coded into our application. As part of that, the depositor will step through a couple of triage questions asking them to review our deposit policies to make sure that they don't have any personally identifiable information or personal health information in their data, and to get a sense of what size their data is. Then they'll enter some metadata about their deposit, which is captured in a CSV that we then later use for batch ingest. When they finish the deposit form, they get an email that encapsulates recapitulates all of the information they've just given us, and they get a link to a Box account that is shared with the curation team that they can use to then upload their files. Once that's done, we go ahead and do all of the curation steps on our local machines. We have the curation team review the data set for completeness of documentation, file formats. There is some minimal review of the actual data for some of the PII and PHI things that we talked about. After that, we've gone through all of those steps, then the curation team, which at this point would be me, goes ahead and wraps everything up in a data package and ingests it into the Hyrax application, publishes it, and assigns a DOI. Just to show y'all, these are a couple of our steps in our submission form. This is probably impossible for anyone to read. This will be the email that they get, and you can see that there's a link to the Box account. The Box account comes with, or the Box folder comes with the manifest CSV that I will use for ingest, and then also some further instructions for the depositor and the deposit agreement so that the depositor has the language, what they're agreeing to by depositing with our repository.
All right, so I'm going to be talking a little bit more about what we have now in our older system and some of the things we hope to have in our Hyrax-based solution going forward. Right now, within our DSpace environment, we have a highly mediated submission process. And that's partly by choice, but it's also partly due to the set of technologies we're using, and that data files over a certain size threshold actually get stored within an external hierarchical storage management environment rather than directly through DSpace. And there's the method for how those are then provided for download that works outside of DSpace as well. And so there's a lot of manual intervention and file movement that's necessary to get things set up and available through our current solution. Going forward, we would like to move to have an array of options that we might use with different customers or different users, different use cases. Everything from this very manual intervention sort of approach that we use in some cases to a one-step mediation option that's a little more light touch to unmediated for particular research groups that we have an established relationship with and that have good data management practices and staffing capabilities. within them to be able to support a range. We also right now do DOI minting very manually. We'd like to automate that a little bit more, but not just be minting DOIs like crazy for everything. So that's also something we will be exploring going forward.
Okay, so that's the next topic, branding and relationship to other platforms. This is the second topic. We'll be doing this drill 4 times, coming back and forth. For Michigan, the branding is something we talked about, that Deep Blue data should look like Deep Blue, which is the first page does look like Deep Blue. But if you actually click on both the buttons, they look very different. So that is something we are working on when both are going to be on the same interface, system. Like if both are on Hyrax, it's going to be much easier to have the same branding. So that's what we are working on, is migrating Deep Blue from DSpace to Hyrax. And another thing we added is in the metadata form, the researchers can add a link to the IR if they already have their data set in Deep Blue. So that is like cross connection between the 2 platforms. And that is all. Oh, one more thing. We are talking to ICPSR to work with them on discoverability and to improve more like how their data sets are more discoverable and how they are working, so more like their open ICPSR system.
I'm going to skip past these points. I've got a couple of screenshots here. So I wanted to kind of make a point, which is that the research data repository is one part of the overall research data management program in the libraries. And you can see this is a page from our Data and Visualization Services Department, the Research Data Management Consultant Group, which is part of the curation team that works with Maura on the ingest of data sets. You can see the data repository listed there as kind of point number 4 in the sidebar there. And even if you navigate to that page about data repository support, they make the point that the repository that we maintain is only one part of ecosystem of repositories that may include others which are appropriate for a particular scholar's needs, and their job is to find the right repository for the scholars in their particular situation. Also, I wanted to show you our DSpace. We are also in the same situation with Indiana and Michigan of using both DSpace and Hyrax at this point. Our Duke space or DSpace instance goes back to 2006, and like Indiana, we have seen it as a stopgap for 12 years. We recently sank quite a lot of time. Our other major repository project this year was to upgrade DSpace from 1.7 to 6.2, and that took quite a lot of our time. And in that course of that work, we did some redesign. We made it look a lot nicer. You can see how the branding for the Duke Space platform is there in that space at the top, that panel at the top, and that Duke Space uses the library's standard banner in its branding. Together, these 2 platforms kind of represent the library's support for open research at Duke. And then again, this is the homepage of our new Hyrax-based repository. We designed a custom banner for this platform. And so there's not really consistency across these two platforms, and one of the things we're looking at is whether we can share branding, naming, and possibly some high-level portal development across these platforms to present a unified approach representing our support for open research.
So in the case of Indiana, we have a lot of challenges around branding. And part of this has to do with kind of history of branding of repository and open access related services. Part of it has to do with our multi-campus environment. When we started our institutional repository about 13 years ago or so, we borrowed the name ScholarWorks from the University of Kansas, and so we call our institutional repository IU ScholarWorks. Then over time, we expanded that IU ScholarWorks name to become more of an umbrella label across a variety of services and systems the library is providing to support open scholarship, open access, research, et cetera. So we had IU ScholarWorks repository as the IR. We had IU ScholarWorks journals as an OJS-based journal, open access journal publishing service. We had IU ScholarWorks data, which was not really its own repository system, but just the fact that you could store data in IU ScholarWorks repository. It became very confusing, and for the most part, faculty were referring to just the DSpace repository as IU ScholarWorks. And so we kind of pulled back from that, and now the repository, the IR, that includes data, is called IU ScholarWorks. And then for IU Bloomington, we have a branding of open scholarship at IUB, and we have under that open data, open research, open publishing. So we're still trying to figure out how we take this forward. Do we call this IU ScholarWorks data? Our IUPUI partners call their data repository IUPUI DataWorks. If this is going to serve all of us and we have different branding from campus to campus, how do we support that? Do we actually have to have the branding of the site shift around depending on what campus a particular collection or a data set comes from? It gets kind of confusing and sometimes contentious in terms of branding and identity across different parts of the university. So we're working through that, and this is a Bloomington pilot initially, but we want it to be able to grow. So we're working on that. There's also the issue of interaction with other systems, and so we have the DSpace, at least for a while. DSpace-based IR will remain, and we want to enable easy linkages between records. We have cases where we'll need linkages with our digital collections repository, which we still will treat as a separate service. So for example, we might have images of objects within our digital collections repository, which will be Hyrax based, on which additional research has been performed by researchers that have derived additional types of data from a museum artifact, for example, or some other type of object that they're publishing through our research data repository. And we want to have easy ways to maintain linkages between those different types of data generated from the same underlying physical object. In addition, looking at where Avalon fits in with this, do we use the Avalon plugins we're developing with Avalon 7 to sort of have media in our data repository for video type data, and then still have kind of digital collections AV separate? We don't have answers to a lot of these yet, but these are some of the questions that we're currently trying to figure out in this area.
Yeah, I'm Fritz Freiheit, as Nabila mentioned. I'm the lead developer on Deep Blue Data. And so the next topic here is customizations. And we've done some fairly extensive modifications to the code base, and one of the most important, of course, is sort of custom metadata and DOI minting directly through the user interface. We also provide a tombstone process, and because we have very large data objects, it was necessary to figure out a mechanism to get data available to the end user without having to have a timeout on their browser. So we integrated with Globus, which provides a mechanism, an FTP-like mechanism for making files available. We've also customized the UI ingest process to include some sort of hand-holding on the inputs, and we do provenance logging, which is basically a who, what, where, when sort of process. And we haven't provided a viewer for that yet, but that's one of the things we plan on doing. We use Cosign for our login process. And we've added our own virus checker and some modifications there to make that more efficient.
So some of the customizations that we worked on involved stripping out self-deposit or curation functionality for users, for end users. The dashboard experience for our users is very different from the out-of-the-box dashboard experience. They have almost no options to do anything except open a form to send a request for modification to the curation team. The second and third ones that are listed there, I'm going to show you, so I'll just skip to the fourth one, which is bulk import and export. We needed to do import ingest on nested works, and we adapted the batch import script from Haiku for that purpose. Here's one of the customizations, a couple of screenshots. At the top, you can see the version widget. We used the Dublin core replaces and is replaced by element to implement a versioning a tracking scheme. We can include a note explaining why the version was replaced. And then this appears towards the bottom of the item, or the work show page. And then underneath, you can see the banner, the warning banner that tells you when you're looking at the previous version of a data set. And then second, because of the way we were kind of using Hyrax, the out-of-the-box breadcrumb trail didn't really map to our information architecture very well. So we implemented a vertical breadcrumb trail similar to what we actually implemented in Duke Space that does something to show the hierarchy of nested work so that when you navigate down to a child work, you can see what its parent is, and you can also track back to the home page. So those are a few of the customizations that we did.
So for Indiana to be able to use Hyrax for research data, we want pretty much all of the customizations that Michigan and Duke have talked about. Some in particular that are important for us, just to reiterate a few things and talk about a few others. Custom metadata is important, and the ability to have different custom metadata element sets for different collections or different types of data objects. So for example, to be able to have Darwin core elements available for biological type data objects, to be able to have other domain appropriate metadata element sets available to perhaps supplement a standard set of metadata elements for data from particular domains. Integrated DOI minting is important. Data citations are important, so being able to have the system from the metadata generate an appropriate citation that a researcher can use to reference that data set within a paper, and perhaps offer that data citation in a few different formats depending on the particular style of a particular discipline. Another thing is that we have a lot of data objects that are kind of compound objects that are in zip files or tar files or disk image type files. And there are a few different approaches we could take with this. We could kind of break things out into child works, allow the way that Duke has done things. We've also thought about other ways of kind of generating some type of index of that to drive more of a Windows Explorer type kind of file browser interface, which we have on another system that we use to provide access to archival disk images that was developed some time ago, which has it's one area of functionality of that system that's particularly nice from some people's perspective. So yeah, these are some of the most important things going forward. And then we have talked with Michigan about what are the biggest needs that we each have that are shared across the two that we might start on co-development with. And Nabila, were you going to talk about these?
Yeah. So this is a list of possible features. We still need to talk about it, so it's not written in stone. We're going to have the meetings in maybe next 2 weeks or so. But the possible features we identified are data citation, which John already mentioned, and then API support. And I think so many other sessions also talked about REST API support in there. So it is possible that maybe Hyrax working group can be working on it. So that's what we're going to collaborate with and see if they're already working on it. We don't really need to work on it, or maybe we work with them on it. So we'll see how it goes. Also improving search and discovery in the repo, and admin features. So there is an admin dashboard, but the service owners, they are not really happy with the whole admin feature. They want more in that. So those are some things we are planning to add. And what else? Oh, yeah. So another thing is for the research data repository, when you upload the files, there is no way to say that this file is a data file or is it a documentation, like a README file for that. So that is another thing that we are planning to add to it. And the files and folder structure, we might look at the way Duke is doing that the folders are actually child work, or we might think of adding the folders as folders for our work. Okay, so.
So currently, we're in the process of porting to 2.0 Hyrax. And historically, we did a in-place migration of the data from Sophia 7 to Hyrax 1. And the current one, we are planning on exporting all of the data and importing it again. And this process will recharacterize it and generate additional thumbnails, that sort of thing. The process will also include a checksum validation on the files. And one of the things that we can do with this is we can actually re-export the metadata once we've done the import and do a file difference between the two to validate, as well as looking at the provenance log, which we'll also be using to validate the migration process. As far as data access is concerned, we have, and these are closely related because they actually functionally use a very similar code to extract a work and all of its files. And if it's small enough, we'll zip it up and download it directly synchronously. And if it's too large, we copy it to a separate NFS space, which is then available through Globus for downloading.
So a couple notes from Duke. As Will mentioned, we were initially uploading all of our research data into our customized Fedora 3 Hydra stack. Enormous shout out to Jim Coble, who scripted this work for us, but we did an export of the metadata and the files from the old stack. Then we did some metadata munging and sort of lightly crosswalked it to the new fields that exist in Hyrax. Did some value normalization there. And then we went ahead and re-ingested all of those data packages into the Hyrax application on behalf of the folks who had initially deposited them with us. And then as a final step, we changed the target URLs for our existing ARC identifiers and DOIs with the Crossref and the EasyID clients. As far as file transfer goes, we're using Box currently, but we recognize that there are some real serious limitations to Box. The largest max file size is about 15 gigs per file. So we don't really have a graceful way of handling large size deposits, and we're hoping that we can just sort of work through that when those circumstances arise. We are also super interested in leveraging the work that Michigan has done with Globus. On Duke's campus, we have Globus, so we're going to try to talk to some higher campus level IT folks about that. We do have an option for full dataset download where you can get all of the files that are associated with the dataset, even if they're part of child works of the main parent work. Unfortunately, that's limited to authenticated users at the at the moment, but we're hoping to expand that to anonymous users as well, because that's better in keeping with our mission as an open data repository. Yeah, so we've got a lot of work to do as far as large data goes, but
all right, for Indiana, kind of looking at how we are going to manage data going forward, I mentioned that our data files in our current institutional repository, they're over a certain size threshold, are actually stored in an external HSM, hierarchical storage management system. And that threshold, which we put in place when we rolled this out 9 years ago, is 150 megabytes, and it has not changed. I think we would have a much higher threshold going forward, but we will still need such a threshold because basically data that we store within this HSM environment called the Scholarly Data Archive, we do not pay for that storage, whereas data we store on disk, we do pay for. And that's a strong incentive to keep things that are not used very frequently and are very large within the HSM environment. This is an environment that's been supported by a group of about 5 people in central IT within the research computing area that's based on IBM HPSS software and is mirrored, it's primarily tape storage, it's mirrored between our data centers in Bloomington and Indianapolis. And it's been pretty reliable. We use it for a lot of different things, including our media digitization as well. And right now, for downloading, essentially when one comes across one of these data objects that is stored within this external system, instead of the regular DSpace download link, there's a PURL that points to, resolves to a download service that stages the download request and then it starts the file download once the file has been staged from tape to temporary disk storage. Going forward, we'll want to provide other options, I think, as well. I think we'll want to adopt the Globus download strategy that Michigan has implemented. We'll want to have probably be able to stage a request and then get some kind of notification via email or otherwise when the file's available for HTTP download. Et cetera. So that's one thing we'll be looking at. In terms of upload right now, we use a box widget that's embedded within the documentation page for how to provide us with data sets for storage in the repository. That works for files up to a certain size. Otherwise, data comes in all kinds of different ways via hard drives, et cetera. We also, the same storage environment that we use, this SDA storage environment, is also used directly by researchers. So any researcher can get an account in that system. And I think they get a quota initially of something like 100, 150 terabytes. So a lot of research groups on campus use that, and researchers use that as working data storage or sometimes kind of semi-permanent data storage. And we want to make it easy for people who have data that's already in that environment or other kind of centrally supported research storage environments, as well as external environments like Box, to be able to easily initiate requests to ingest from those sources. So a variety of different delivery, download methods, a variety of different upload methods in order to really meet researchers where they are now in terms of how they work with their data when it's in its working state. In terms of migration, we haven't done a lot of planning there, but we do have a lot of experience in other kind of big migration efforts from non-Samvera to Samvera, or from Fedora 3 to Fedora 4 based Samvera in the context of Avalon and our other AV media related projects. Some of the unique issues we'll have will be the fact that right now we have data intermixed with publications within our IR, and DSpace uses the handle system, and so all of those handles are under the same handle prefix, and if we move data, migrate the data objects but not the publication objects from the IR, then we'll need to put some kind of redirect layer in place to redirect those handles to the Hyrax-based data repository. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is to figure out how to do that in a way that is more sustainable than someone putting a bunch of redirect rules in an Apache config and then forgetting why they're there in a few years when that gets upgraded. We're also concerned about how we export preservation packages. So even for data that's small enough that it's not stored within this SDA environment, that's kind of our preservation store. So we want to be able to copy those in there. And then also have ways that we can export things out to external preservation environments, whether that's DeepIn or AP Trust. We're doing some kind of strategic planning work right now around digital preservation and what our strategy is for different systems, including our IR and data repository. So we'll need to be able to accommodate the recommendations of that as well. So I think that is it for our presentations on these different topics, and we have plenty of time now for questions from y'all.
Green, yes, okay. So I talked to a lot of the stakeholders at Stanford Libraries about research data in our repository. We have a very, very bare bones, and it works in a very bare bones kind of way. But then they go look at Dataverse. And they say, why can't we do that too? And so this has been a recurring conversation, because I don't know if any of you have seen Dataverse. You have Dataverse, you know it well. It's got a lot of nice features. We have our reasons for not adopting it, but I could see why one would want to. Anyway, I'm curious if you all have had conversations along those lines, like the kinds of features that include visualizations or the ability to kind of peek inside a data set through the UI so you can know whether you want to download it, and all of those kinds of things would sound really useful. And if you've thought about how we might go that direction in the Samvera world.
Okay, so I don't know all the Dataverse features, but the one you mentioned about like just being able to just peek into the data set and before downloading, this is on our wish list to add to Hyrax. So maybe, so again, I am not sure about all the other features, but if you say the features, maybe we already have it on the wish list. So, so it's not an MVP, that's why it is in production without it, but we have a long wish list, which we can share sometime.
That would probably be useful, yeah. And get some other input on, plus ones and all that sort of thing.
Dataverse has come up in our conversations a number of times. Now, if I understand it correctly, it's both a hosted platform and it's one that you can host you can host yourselves, and that's what UVA has. Yeah, so we particularly wanted to provide a service for scholars who want their data sets at Duke and maintained by Duke, and there are some, and there's at least one, we have one very happy repeat customer, and if you go look at our platform, you will see his name in many of our data sets if you browse the data sets. And so he's great. And he's actually very articulate about identifying the library as a place that he wants to be the custodian for his research data. He doesn't trust publishers, he doesn't trust external services as much as he trusts us, so that's great. I'm not sure I can recall what's caused us to dismiss Dataverse as a platform to host ourselves when we discussed it, I think about 1.5 years ago. But I do know that we specifically ourselves wanted to use Hyrax for this project because we wanted to learn about Hyrax. We wanted to learn more about Hyrax for ourselves, and this seemed like a fairly quick way to get into it. I think for us, we see it as a platform to build on, and so the types of features that you mentioned are ones that we would be looking at. We are also working with a project called Morphosource, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a platform for 3D visualizations of biological specimens. It's a repository for that type of content. We have developers working with the library who are committed to that project now on an NSF grant. And the visualization of 3D data is something that's very important to them, and we'll be working with them on kind of porting their current LAMP stack that they built Morphosource into Hyrax. And then they will probably be very involved in some of that type of feature development themselves, so we can at least see a way forward for it. So that was longer than any of the sections I actually presented.
Oh, Chris.
Thank you for the panels. I was taking a lot of notes, and I might have missed this, but you were talking about possible co-development around a RESTful API, and I was wondering if you could talk about what are the use cases you're envisioning for that API?
Well, at least one of them is federated search.
Yeah, I really don't remember any other use cases for REST API. We can connect later.
Can I have a question for the audience.
Great.
I'd be interested to hear if anybody, so all of us talked about branding our platforms, and everybody kind of has legacy platform names that they've been using, and they're kind of thinking about the future. I wondered if anybody has any stories themselves or has any experience, anything that worked for them in terms of coming to a good solution. If not, that's okay, but I'm always interested to hear about that area because it has been really tough for us. We are not marketing people.
We're not marketing people either because we don't have very many objects in our repositories. But our repository is called Libra because UVA has a thing about Virgo and Leo and constellations. But anyway, so we have Libra, and then we have 3 different heads. We have Libra ETD, Libra Open, and then Libra Data. And we have, my poster talked about a one-stop shop where you go to this one page, libra.virginia.edu, and then you pick on the box. You either want to submit data or ETDs or OpenWorks. And we can stick whatever we want to sort of underneath, so when you click on deposit, you go to whatever repository that does. But Libra is our repository, and then we can stick whatever we want to.
Do people like that name? I mean, they're like, if somebody came up and said, I really don't like that name, I want to change it, like what would the reaction be? People.
We would need a committee for that.
Right, sure.
No, but actually, I mean, my first thought when I heard Libra, because it's the open, repository, Libra free. Right. But no, Libra, it's not that Libra. But still, that's the way I talked. But we really haven't had anyone say they wanted to change Libra.
Okay.
Don't put that.
I mean, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, what if?
So for those who don't know me, I'm John Weiss. I work with Nabila and Fritz at Michigan. So our institutional repository, so Deep Blue, is from a service perspective, it's part of publishing, and publishing, they kind of have a branding. They think in that way more than maybe we do, and they've been kind of helpful in us helping out, figure out how to approach the extension and of Deep Blue to include data. And so I don't know if you got any publishing folks you can tap, but you might try that. But I know it's not an easy conversation.
I feel like the publishing people guard their secrets really well. Anyway, thank you.
I have a couple of comments to throw in. Just that we have one name for our repository, Stanford Digital Repository. It's what everything goes into, and I mean we've been using that name for so long. It's got traction around campus. I mean the people who've heard it 5 times now know it, but that's just it. It takes time, and we have people who literally go to walk around campus and talk to people about it. It's an ongoing communication plan. It doesn't end. It's just always has to happen. And our science data in particular, with respect to data sets, she's just constantly talking to people about it. And it's the face-to-face and like reinforcing it through your network and your relationships, I think, is how we've had success with it. But on that point, I'll just say that because we put all of our stuff under one name, for data in particular, we've heard from our curators, our liaison librarians, and kind of the stakeholders in the library. They're like, people want to go to a data interface. It's like the one aspect of all of our digital content that people really do want a dedicated portal to, which has sort of been flying in the face of our whole thing. So we've been talking about that a lot in particular, and that's one of the reasons they say, but like we could just have Dataverse, and then we could just send people there. So anyway.
So I'll make a quick comment. One of the things that I have run into having joined the library a year ago, in particular with research data services, is that it's an uphill battle to get researchers to think about depositing their data.
Yes.
It's like at the end of the day, they go, oh, I got to publish, and then all of a sudden it's an important thing to do. So one of the things that's really important is to do that outreach across the campus to research, and our research data services do that.
So I wanted to answer back on the question about APIs. Sorry to take
Oh,
it back.
cool.
Then we can come back to the, for us, some of the API use cases that are of particular interest are essentially around ingest and export. So for example, if we have a relationship with a research center or lab that is regularly depositing data and the data is good and the metadata is good, that we can actually have a REST API that they could hook up their workflow system to push things in. And then related to the federated search comment also, I mean, both perhaps to support federated search within our own services, but also being able to have perhaps potentially in some cases feeds of metadata for particular collections for discipline-specific aggregators, thinking particularly some of the biology-related things. So mainly kind of data in and out kind of APIs.
Yeah, likewise.
So kind of at the intersection of these things, of APIs and interfaces for data and branding and all this, there's some interesting potential situations, use cases where it's a data set, but it has characteristics that are maybe like a digital collection, or you want to provide an interface that's a little bit more, you want to do both, right? And the CT scans, the things that we would want to put into MorphoSource, for example, each one is a big chunk of data, and we're heading down the path of actually putting each of those in our repository as an individual thing, as opposed to together as a data set. And then the desire to want to, for any user to want to, get that preview of the object, or actually to maybe just view the 3D rendered thing. I mean, do we link off to MorphoSource? Do we build that into our data repository? Is it some sort of presentation layer? Is it IIIF and into our digital collections? Do we also want people have metadata in the digital collections? And also with some of those things, if they're museum objects that have been imaged, then they might have a different sort of life cycle, or it might be that maybe it was a bunch of stuff that was done as part of a research project, but maybe there's going to be an ongoing flow of these things into a repository. So it'd be easy to get kind of stuck in this territory and go down the rabbit hole too far. But I think it just struck me that a number of things that were just mentioned, they all kind of come together, and there's some real challenges there.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've been struggling with. I kind of alluded to it, but the specific case is a paleontology collection where we have specimens that are being digitized both through 2D photography as well as 3D photogrammetry, through kind of an organized, routinized digitization process, but then we also have researchers coming in and working with these specimens and doing other types of, CT scans, other types of imaging or data collection that maybe aren't as uniform from object to object. And we have been having a lot of internal discussions about where does this belong? And part of our issue is that the service ownership for the digital collections repository lies in a different part of the organization than service ownership for research data and publication repositories. And so we've been having a lot of discussions and debates about where is this? Is it research data? Is it a digitization project? Is it a digital collection? Where does it belong? And I don't think there are any right answers to that. And to be able to move forward, the conclusion we came to was basically that the routinized digitization goes under digital collections, and then this additional data is research data, and we need a really good way of linking between the two. If someone discovers the one, they can get to the other, and vice versa. I don't know that that's a good answer, but it's the answer we came up with to just be able to move forward with both of these efforts.
Other comments or questions? Here we go.
Yeah, maybe one observation. What I'm from Germany, from Bochum, and I've talked to several of the people already. We're setting up research data service. So I'm from the IT service part. The library is another part, and how to get the researcher to the repository is the biggest question, I think, was raised there. And we try an approach where we integrate our service into the research cycle, like in the planning and talking to the researchers with bigger groups like clusters, and then setting up like a shared space where they can share their data, adding metadata in some format they like, what we can read in later. And so it's more that the research data is created in the research cycle, and then raw data should not change. It should enter a repository or at that point. So I think it should be not at the end of one research project, but rather in the research cycle, that the data is coming to the whatever repository or is saved on some place where it can be added later.
Right, yeah. There are different thoughts on this, kind of depending on the nature of the research itself and the size and complexity of it, but there's something to be said for getting management over those bits very early in the process.
So what you said, Johannes, makes me think about workflows, and one of the things that we focus on here is the workflow from the data repository perspective. But could we provide a workflow through the web, through Hyrax, that is from the researcher's perspective, and then in the end collect, harvest what they've done?
One of the things, we have an OSF institutional account at Duke, and one of the things that we've thought about some and haven't really acted on yet, but is integrating in some fashion OSF with the repository, so that the researcher can use OSF as a collaboration space to do the work that they're doing with other folks, and then when they wish to finalize their data, push it to the repository, because the repository is not really a collaboration space. Another API, Fritz just whispered in my ear.
So it is 3 o'clock, so I think we're going to wrap it here. But thank you all for your contributions. Thanks to the panelists.